Afternoon. This webinar offers closed captioning. To enable closed captioning, click on the blue widget or the CC in a box located on the bottom left of the screen. Welcome to the City of Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection webinar. We have adapted our regular business education workshops at City Hall into these webinars until further notice. Please note any websites or emails that I mentioned will be posted in the chat box. All BACP offices are open to limited members of the public. Masks are required in all BACP facilities. For those seeking business licensing assistance, we strongly encourage the processing of licenses and permits online. Business licenses can be applied for or renewed online at chicagobusinessdirect.org, or you could call 312-74-GO-BIZ. If you are part of the BACP Entrepreneur Certificate Program, you can get credit for joining this webinar by sending an email to bacpoutreach@cityofchicago.org. If you want to learn about the program, please visit chicago.gov/businesseducation. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available at youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. I will post mentioned information in the chat box. We encourage attendees to ask questions. Please use the chat box and send your questions to all panelists. There will be a Q&A session at the end. Today's webinar will be Cybercrime and ID Theft Prevention for Businesses, presented by the Better Business Bureau, the BBB, and cyber experts from Sagin. Turning it over to Tom from the BBB.
Thank you so much. We love the partnership with BACP. It's one of our favorite organizations, and we greatly value the time and everybody who can join us today. We're going to be going over a lot of cybercrime issues and also ID theft issues. And I have one of the smartest guys in the room with me, Brandon Patrick from Sagin. Brandon has managed IT services and IT management for 17 years. And also works a great deal with data and security. So I can't think of a better partner than having Brandon along with us. My name is Tom Johnson. I am the Vice President and Public and Board Relations with the BBB. And as we go through our presentation today, you'll have our contact information up there, and you feel free to answer or ask any questions anytime you want to today. Brandon, welcome, and please introduce yourself a little bit further. Your expertise is simply astounding.
Sure. And thanks, Tom, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brandon Patrick. I am the director of our IT Managed Services practice at our company, which is Sagin. We're a Chicago-based consulting company. We work with small, medium-sized businesses all across the city, nonprofits, support clients with sites nationwide, some in Canada and Mexico, so we're small, but we've got a large reach. But our range of solutions typically fall in, like, all things security, data management, managing what we call infrastructure, so your computers, your network equipment, servers, etc., cloud-based services, architecture that you have based there, a little bit of everything, if you will. And yeah, with the pandemic, we've been doing a lot of these type of presentations because this is a hot topic this month, but also just sort of year round. So I hope everybody learns a little bit of something here. And like Tom said, please feel free to use the chat. We'll try to answer any specific questions that you have as we go through this, but I think it's a great webinar to kind of prepare you for the year ahead too.
Hey, Brandon, if you want to advance some slides, we'll get rolling with this. And again, we welcome your questions as we go along. Again, my name's Tom Johnson. Better Business Bureau has been providing information about cybercrime and identity theft for many years now. And who would have known it? We thought it was going to be huge 5 years ago. Unfortunately, we said it was going to be one of the biggest problems in the United States, and it grew in significance in ways nobody could see at the time. 50% of all small business owners say, and this is one of the most astounding facts that I find, 50% of all small businesses say they could only stay in business 3 months or less if they were hit by a significant cybersecurity attack. That is absolutely stunning. and great reasons to get out there and really incorporate some of this knowledge today and talk to a pro. Also, over 70% of the attacks, you hear the news stories and all the giant companies get the giant headlines, right, about who's been cyber attacked. Well, 70% of the attacks come after small business owners. Now, you won't read about those in the headlines of Cranes or CNBC business shows or the evening news. But small businesses, medium-sized businesses are really getting hit all the time because cyber criminals see them as an easy target and also the most at risk, proportional-wise. So they take advantage of crisis and stress, and cyber criminals follow the news, unfortunately, just like everyone else, to really step up their attacks. And today, we're here to help. And we can go to the next slide. And there's basically 5 steps to cybersecurity. It's identify your assets, protect your assets, detect incidents, and then respond. But you have to have a response plan. And that's one of the great things about having Brandon with us today. And then you have to recover. And Brandon will have some really good, simple suggestions about how to prepare and also have your information backed up in the same place in case this ever happens to you. So that's the quick pinwheel. And as we go to the next slide, just kind of we'll put these 5 steps up here. And Brandon, you want to add anything to this? Because there's really a lot of information packed into these 5 key tools.
Yeah, I'll just expand a little bit. So just so everybody's aware, when we say assets, we're referring to computers, network equipment. If you have servers, what are the digital assets in a way that you have? So one of the things, like, for example, like when we get started with a client, our first thing to do is just to collect that information ourselves. What's your inventory of all the devices and everything that you have? And you just start there, and that's what makes most sense. And for most organizations, that's starting with, okay, how many computers do we have? To go on to number 2, it's okay, so what protection is relevant for that type of asset? So again, computers, that's where you want to make sure you have a proper antivirus on the computer. And I think that's pretty common and understood these days. And that you also go through these next things to basically, well, let me take a pause there. So after you've protected like the basic assets, such as a computer or a server that might need something like an antivirus, the other thing that you might want to just consider is how do you detect security problems? And I guess also, do you have a need to do that? Meaning, do you have any data or information that lives within your environment on your computer that, as Tom was mentioning, if you lost or somebody could get access to, would your business be disrupted? I think that's probably part of that step too, is just identify what you could lose and how they might access it. And access is really just over the internet for the most part. There might be some cases where you could say that somebody might get into your business and get on the Wi-Fi if you have like a guest wireless or a way where they can plug into a wall port. That's one of the ways that they can get into your business. But it's good just to recognize what that is. So figure out how they can come in and what do you do to detect them. If you don't detect, we'll get into that in a little bit, but that's where some of you might have heard things like a firewall and prevention along those lines, and that helps detect and prevent anybody from getting into your network. Respond and recover, those are, I think, something that everybody can now relate to. What's called an incident response plan is something that you want to have in place for if your data gets lost or systems become inaccessible. What do you want to do in those kind of scenarios? Everybody got a little bit of that preview with the pandemic. And from the IT perspective, that was a disaster, which is somewhat close to an incident like this, where okay, so you have to now suddenly work from home, change of plans for everybody. How do you react? So I think it's really important to kind of give that some thought as well too. And for any of you businesses that might have a lot of your customer information or sensitive customer information, that's where the respond becomes a little bit more important, because you might have seen like Target, for example, or some of these big names in the news media that had credit card information stolen. They got to figure out how to respond, and deal with customer complaints, all that kind of stuff, because that data was lost. I mean, if you become victim to a cyber attack, you might have that same problem. And the recover is kind of like 1 through 4, right? You just go right back through. So how do you, if you weren't protected appropriately, how do you get back on track? Having things like data backed up at another location is one of the basic ones of recovery, but also just making sure any of your assets that are extremely sensitive or critical are somehow, you have a duplicate of, I'll just say. Whether that's data offsite, a secondary piece of equipment in place so that you can get up and running quickly. Again, we'll go through some of these things that might, with some examples that we might go through in just a minute, but yeah, recover is just a kind of a repeat of the ones 1 through 4, but it's good that you make sure that you have 4 and 5 listed out in a plan of some sort.
If you want to go to the next slide, Brandon, we'll, there's a lot of things we want to talk about. One of the things that really, really shocks me all the time is hearing over and over the #1 way that businesses get cyber attacked is through a hole in a security in a simple email, people pretending to be people that they're not. And business email compromise scams are really a big deal now. They were before, but now they're really a big deal, where you may get a quick message from who you think is your boss or your chief financial officer or somebody in the company asking you to do things. I've been asked to run out and get from our CEO, Steve Burns. I've received emails. Hey, it's Steve. Why don't you go out and get $50 gift cards for everybody for Christmas? About 5 other people with the company got that same email. Luckily, we've been prepared for it because we do train with Sagin, who is our IT provider. So be very suspicious of any emails you get from anyone in your company that seem out of the norm. One of the best super forms of security is very low tech. Pick up the phone and call them directly, or back in the days when we were all in the offices together, walk down the hallway and said, hey, did you really ask me to go get gift cards for everybody? Did you actually ask me to send this person a bonus? And just really look at that email that came in. Look at the address that it came from. It may have your boss's name or one of your key employees' names on there, but if you look at the email, it's not coming from the correct address. So really verify and make a phone call or a direct contact. And Brandon, feel free to embellish any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, one of the tricks that I know our CEO likes to tell people is that if you ever happen to think that it is real and you click on the link and it takes you to a page where it's asking for login credentials and you find that you might feel a little bit uncertain, he always tells people to try entering a fake email and password. It's one of those things where if it's fake, it'll accept it. If it's not, it'll say wrong username and password. It's that simple. But that's sometimes the easiest way to find out if something's real or not. But to go along this lines of just speaking about this in general, yeah, this is probably the #1 cyber threat currently, email compromise. So with everybody working from home, companies have moved a lot of their data and information to cloud-based services so that they're more easily accessible by a remote workforce. So if the data is no longer inside a company's walls, let's say, behind a network on somebody's server, it's now in the cloud, the only way they can get to it is through the employees and email compromise. So it's just something to be very aware of. And one of the things that I think we'll touch on in a minute that helps stop this is what's called multi-factor authentication. And it's actually the same thing that Tom just mentioned. And I'm sure everybody has experienced it perhaps with like your bank. Whenever you log into your bank portal online, you'll get a text message that has a code so that you can finish the login process so you can gain access to your accounts. They have those things for just about every system that's out there now. So it's really important that you do that. And it's just like this, make a phone call to the person, right? It's the second means of authenticating that is you. So anytime we get started with the client, that's like the first thing we make sure that they turn on if they don't have it on already. It's very easy to do, and it stops all phishing that we'll explain here in just a minute.
And if you want to advance to the next slide, yeah, I remember when we first changed the dual protection on this, and it seems like such a hassle for the first week, and then it's like, I can't believe we ever did it without this. And Brandon, I actually grabbed one of your slides from a different presentation and snuck it in here on you. You want to go over some of this information on social engineering, because it's actually fascinating.
Yeah, email compromise is a portion of this, and I think once it's described as social engineering, I think it makes it a little bit more understandable for everyone. So phishing is something that you probably see daily. That's where, for the reasons I just mentioned, cyber criminals are trying to use emails, text messages, or instant messages, trying to get you to provide them with sensitive information. So basically, your login credentials, so they can get access to your information. And what I think is kind of interesting there, most people in small businesses think, well, I don't, I'm not an important person or whatever. I don't know what they would need access to. It's one of those things where they might not necessarily get a lot out of hacking into your account per se. It's more so what you might have access to at your company. So they could get in there and they get access to all the other information that's there. And that's what they're really looking for. So can they expose customer credit card information that's in a system that you have access to, for example? So that happens through phishing. It also happens through baiting. It's very similar, but they try to use this as a means of, they try to use a means of like a reward or a promise for something like it says here, for like a free movie if you log in with this. A lot of times you see those in advertising, but it's really just trying to incentivize you, same kind of way, to just provide your sensitive information. Spear phishing is kind of interesting. It's phishing and baiting in a way, but it's very specific. Hackers have gone as far now as to actually look into you and understand, like if you're, for example, if you have an about page and it's got your contact information on there because you're a C-level or owner or, whatever, a key position within the company, hackers look for that. And then they try to figure out using the email that's provided on the info at, page to understand like what the last or what the URL for your emails are, and then they can just basically start using combinations of your name, first letter, last name, first name, and then the URL until finally they get your email right. But with spear phishing, what that is that's where they really try to just dive a little bit further and try to send you some sort of message in a way that is personable, so it doesn't seem like it's actually phishing. I think one of the good examples that I heard was, I think a few years ago on a panel with the BBB where there was somebody from the FBI, and they mentioned that they're seeing a rise in spear phishing on Facebook. So if there's a group, for example, where, let's say it's a kids soccer team that parents communicate, updates for whatever's happening, and somebody could go in there and be like, hey, here's a link to the pictures that I took from last week's game. Click it, and you'll be able to see them all. Sounds a little bit outlandish, but that's actually happening, and it's been happening for a few years now. So it's something to be aware of. Always be wary of links that somebody's sending you unless you know that it's something that you can trust. Then for vishing, it's the same as phishing. It's just over the phone. So I think this has been around probably the longest, and I think that's where people try to call you now, and rather than just try to get you to donate money to their cause, they're also trying to get credentials or access to your accounts, whatever they might be.
And it's amazing to see how this has also increased with has gotten more sophisticated with time. You used to get a call saying, is this the man of the house or the woman of the house? And then it was like, is this Mr. Johnson? And now it's like, hi, Tom, how are you today? It's amazing how they've really tried to personalize this and how good, very good that they've become. I've been just shocked at some of the pitches I've received on my telephone, and it sounds so very, very real, but you know that it's not. Do you want to jump to the next slide? I'll see if I can surprise you with anything else.
Yeah, and to kind of explain, what could be coming through, that's what this slide really entails. So one of the things that is a common misconception is most people think malware is a form of or viruses of, sorry, I'm getting into backwards. Malware is a virus. It's actually the other way around. Malware is just, this term used for any sort of malicious software that might be running on your computer that does something, right? A virus is something that causes programs to not run appropriately. That's, I think, what most people are familiar with because it's been around the longest. Back in the day, your Internet Explorer, for example, would stop working and you couldn't surf the internet just right. Spyware is where there's something on your computer, but they're trying to just simply gather information. So, they don't necessarily affect any programs. You don't know it's there, and they're just trying to gather information. It's browsing history. There's things called key logging software where they can see what keys you're logging. That's another way that they can get access to your username and password, like we were talking about, previously. But can be pretty dangerous. Ransomware. So this is the latest and greatest, if you will. It's where essentially, like, if you happen to get the malware on your computer and it is ransomware, you might not know it actually at first until you go to open one of your files on your computer, for example. Because whenever you do that, a pop-up will appear from the cyber criminal that says, you know, you need to pay me X amount of Bitcoin to decrypt your files. Because what happens is that program encrypts all the files so that when you open them, they can't be accessed unless you have a password. So the only way around this one is, A, we never recommend paying the cyber criminal because there's no guarantee that that they'll give you the password to get access to your files anyway. But two, the way to get restored from this is restoring from a backup. So if you're backing up your files nightly to some offsite or just some different location, that's really the best way to get back on track after you have ransomware. You simply have to take those duplicate files from that backup that you have and replace them with the ones that were infected by ransomware. And that really is the only way to protect against this. But I will say, though, over the last couple of years, a lot of the antivirus solutions that are out there have become better at identifying ransomware because it's like a virus. It spreads suddenly across all your files. So a lot of the antivirus programs that are out there now also include ransomware protections where if they see multiple files getting accessed all at once, it'll stop it. The only problem is it has to see that first, right, before it stops it. So you'll still lose access to some of the files and data that you might have on your computer or on your server. So anyway, that's the number one thing that I would say that you need to be aware of in today's world, and also know that backing up your data is the only real way around that, which is kind of scary. But I guess the worst case, you would just lose one day's worth of data. Then lastly, Adware Scareware. Something to just be aware of is that when you go to Google and you do a Google search, the ads on the side of the screens can contain malware. It's Google does have all sorts of algorithms, and as does any other search engine, to try to identify when a hacker is putting up a fake ad to try to dupe you into clicking a link, right? But sometimes they get through. And that's what happens. So adware is like that, or it's ads or pop-ups that suddenly appear on your computer, or you accidentally click on them on the side, and they cause you to do some sort of action. And a lot of times, it takes you to a place where you will then get spyware, virus, or ransomware. And scareware is the one I think we've all seen, where you're browsing the internet, or you click on a link that somebody shares on social media, and suddenly that you get a pop-up that says your computer's been infected. Call this number. Don't ever do that. It just means that you really need to just exit out everything, restart your computer, and you'll be fine. There's actually, in that case, nothing on your computer right at the moment. It's just that whatever you would have interacted with would have caused that pop-up to appear. And the next action that you might do, which would be to interact with that pop-up, would cause harm to your computer, for example. But if you just simply close it, restart, is what we always recommend, just because you'll be fine. But anyway, those are kind of the main threats to be aware of. If any of those sound like, well, they seem like they've been around for a while, well, that's true. They just find different ways to get to you. And that kind of goes back to our prior slide where we talked about social engineering. The threats themselves haven't changed for a while, but it's just how they're getting to end users has been interesting.
And I don't know how huge or widespread it is. I can tell you back in the pre-COVID days when we did a lot of networking at BBB and other organizations, I don't think there'd ever be a situation for the longest time where I could be at a table of 12 and not have somebody put their hand in the air when I asked, has anybody ever been hit by ransomware? And that's when the stories really, started to come out. And they're really tough stories about people having to go learn about Bitcoin, create a Bitcoin account because the scammers had demanded Bitcoin payments. And it really disrupted businesses in a significant way financially and time consuming, because inevitably it turned out to be the CEO or a high ranking official of the small or medium sized business that had to go and pay the ransomware. So I'm glad to know that there's been advances in some of the antiviral technologies. If you want to jump to the next slide. We'll cover some various topics. Again, we invite anybody to just jump any questions that you have as a business owner, as a consumer, anything that you want to ask about your business, we'll take all questions. You know, you mentioned this a little bit, Brandon. Working from home has really become an extra advantage, I would think, for cyber attacks. It makes you more vulnerable. I think a lot of people are, you know, first off, you're working alone in many cases. Secondly, there's stress to that, and everybody's used to sending emails back and forth. So it makes you think less of that process. And we talked about this, but the remote workplace, especially if you get an urgent message from someone, you're tied into your computer way more often during the course of the day, and you have a tendency to respond faster if you're sitting there at work. Can you talk about a couple of more things about what working from home has presented as far as problems?
Yeah, I know, and some of these things might sound really basic, but there are things that I think people lost track of when they went from working in the office building to now working from home. And the first one that we always like to mention to everyone is just make sure you're restarting your computer. That's an important process that very early in the pandemic, everybody kind of overlooked. You know, you're working from home, balancing being at home with the rest of your family, trying to work, you know, running here and there to manage the dog barking, kids screaming. And, you know, day ends, you just run off to make dinner or whatever the case is, right? But in the old days, you would leave the office, you would turn off your computer, put it in your bag, do the commute home, come back the next day, turn the computer on, you know, and it's a process. And that's a very important step because that's when a lot of Windows updates happened for anybody that's got a, you know, computer running Windows. And all things security get applied during those updates, and they tend to come out weekly. So in times like the pandemic where cyber crime is on the rise, you just want to make sure that you're doing that because then you have, you know, everything latest and greatest that you need to on your computer. So if you don't make a habit or haven't been making a habit of it, make sure while working from home that you and all your employees, if they're working from home on company devices, that they're restarting those on at least a weekly basis. And I think that's the number one thing that we could recommend for the work from home scenario. And I touched on it before, but the other thing to just be aware of is that if you are at a company where after everybody started working from home, you decided to do something like, well, we're not going to use the file server anymore. We're going to use Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, Box, Dropbox, whatever the service might be, and you move data from what we call on-premise that would have been sitting in your office on a server to the cloud-based resource, you need to be aware that your weakest link is your employees. Because again, going back to the whole multi-factor authentication and getting access to your accounts, they're trying to go through your employees so that they can get access to that data that is now stored in the cloud. And that's probably number two big thing to just simply be aware of. And the best thing that you can do for that is some of the stuff that we've already recommended, multi-factor authentication, antivirus solutions and things like that. Those are just basics that you need to make sure that you have in place. But the other big factor is simply what you're doing now, education. So making sure that everybody's aware that they need to be cognizant of these sort of things while working from home.
If you would be kind enough to jump to the next slide. And I apologize, this was our slideshow to run and Brandon stepped in at the last minute because we were having some technical issues. So we talked about this, malware, it infects computers, delivered in everything from fake lookalike emails, texts, installs viruses, often in the form of great product deals. We hear this all the time at the BBB. Oh, we got this great deal on whatever it was, office supplies, a new Microsoft computer, special offer for your company, and they clicked on it, and that's all the entree that some of these people need to get inside your computer. Anything you want to, I know we've done a good job of explaining this.
Yeah, I think we've got that covered.
Okay, on to the next, please. Also, I just want to touch on something that a lot of businesses really get hit by, and it's fake check scams. Not only work at home people, but also people that work for businesses. There's an amazing fact out there. Scammers send out these fake checks. They look very, very real. And especially if you know someone who's doing work from home or for a company. But the check, if you run it through your account, by law, the banks have to run that check through your account in a certain amount of hours. The estimate is between 2 to 3 business days, but it can take weeks, almost a month in some cases, before they weed out a fake check. So what happens is somebody will sell you something for your business. Someone will send any type of check like this, but it's an overpayment. You were supposed to get $1,500 and maybe you got $2,000, or they wanted you to buy a computer and they were shipping you a $1,500 rebate, but they actually sent you a check for $2,500. You put it in the bank and they say, hey, would you mind sending us a check back for $1,000? We overpaid this. Your computer's on the way and you're supposed to get a $1,500 rebate. We've heard endless stories like this. It goes on. And just remember that almost any checks that come through the mail, I would be hard pressed to come up with an example that's not a fake, but unless it's coming directly from a vendor that you do business with, it's almost certainly a fake. And the thing people, again, don't realize, you can cash these checks, look in your account 3 days later and say, hey, the check cleared. It didn't really clear. It got through the first hurdle. But again, banks are not liable for this in the case of businesses. They are consumers. But for businesses, they don't have to pay that money back. It's really important for you to know that checks can literally take 3 to 4 weeks to be detected as a fraud. So I just want to throw that out there. Brandon, anything to add to that? Is that anything you see?
No, that covers it.
Okay, phony text messages, we see this all the time. Just a reminder, these things look real, they come in all day. I get at least 1 or 2 a day. I get so many phone calls, I'm surprised my home office phone hasn't rang today, but it's almost all fake calls. It's unbelievable. And often these texts carry a dangerous link and they ask for personal information. Don't click on any of this stuff, just like emails, just like we're talking about the phishing and spear phishing emails. Don't click on these. It's common policy for scammers to confirm that they have a real phone number. So any type of response to this can be dangerous, or add your number to a file. Brandon, if you want to move to the next slide, please. Fraudulent health products, fraudulent business products, we've seen it all, from huge product sales. They look authentic, they sell businesses a lot of fake items. This was really huge in COVID, but also it happens in business all the time. Scammers have no mercy. They will appear to be the IRS because you've made a mistake on your business taxes. They will imitate any government agency at all. We had a huge problem. The Small Business Administration, the SBA, they were getting hit with all kinds of fake emails going out to people acting like they're the SBA. And anyone who lives in the state of Illinois knows the series of fake emails and messaging that came out for state agencies, everything from health to business. So just a reminder, always check things out. Never click on anything that comes in that looks suspicious whatsoever. It's really important that you do that.
Yeah, and Tom, I'll just add that if anybody ever comes across a website for something related to that you were actually looking for online, and they're offering something that just seems too good to be true, there's so much of this now well, let me say this differently. There's so many people online surfing for every whatever purpose these days that most fraudulent websites or services are categorized or captured somewhere. So a lot of times if you just Google like whatever that website name is or company is in scam, you might see just your first few links that pop up to verify that. There's a lot of different sites that are devoted to recording, acknowledging fraudulent sites that people find. So a lot of times you can just do a quick search to find out if it's fake.
And we can move on to the next slide, but one more thought on that is just we get calls into the BBB, and it's not that infrequent of a scam. Fake invoices going out to businesses for things that they didn't order by fraudulent companies. We've busted down 2 shell organizations in Chicago alone that were sending out invoices nationwide, but nationwide fake invoice companies are sending out to Chicago businesses from all over the country, or in many cases overseas. So we've talked about the fake emails. We talk about the fake phone calls, ask for credit card numbers, routing numbers. That's the real danger of some of these things. They'll say, hey, we got a problem with one of your business checks. With some problem with the bank, can you give us your routing number? We just want to double check it. All this information and free business government stimulus, you're qualified, we've got a free loan for you. All these type of things are simply scams, and just be really, really careful on them. You want to jump to the next minute? Thanks. Phony business loans, grant scams, that's all part of the game. We mentioned it before. The SBA was, you know, these scammers literally were sending out millions of emails saying, we got, hey, COVID related, non-COVID related, we've got a government grant for you, we've got free loans for you, we've got rebates for business. The applications that they send out, if you believe this and fill out the application, they get some of your key banking information and personal information. And then some of them add insult to injury by charging you a processing fee for a loan that's never coming your way. So just additional things to watch out for. We really urge anybody, whether you have encountered a scam and lost money or not, really protect your community. Please report it to the BBB scam tracker. I can't tell you the agencies we work with. We're part of a FTC task force along with the FBI, several law enforcement agencies, and we gather this information and take it into regular meetings. And we've taken some pretty decisive information and gone after people from everything with the state's attorney general's office to law enforcement to FCTC fines. BBB is really incorporated into this whole group, and your information can really help save people. So we urge everybody to report it to the BBB scam tracker. That's one resource. And as we move along, the next slide, please. Some of our resources, scam tracker. Also, we got a lot of resources for businesses, bbb.org/small business. And to find a great business you can do business with and read ratings and reviews absolutely for free. All businesses, not just BBB, is at bbb.org. So those are some of the resources that we're dealing with. There's also Ad Truth. If you see fake ads out there, you can actually report them to the BBB, and we have advertising investigators who will take a look at this and knock off the bad ads and report them accordingly. So feel free to use any of these resources. And as we move along, we'll be talking about some more resources that you can go to here. And Brandon, do you want to go over this real quick, because I think this is a great all-encompassing slide for us to go over.
Yeah, and forgive the visual. Sorry for the overlap there in the middle of the screen. One of the things that, I guess let me first explain what you're looking at. So at the bottom of the screen is the things that we've already talked about, the malware, the social engineering, and then it's behind that posters and newsletter portion where you'll see a gray bar that says attack vector. We've talked about all these, but that's just acknowledging the different ways in which any of these threats that can get to you, via email, advertising, websites, a smartphone. And one of the best things I think for all the above for those attack vectors is training. And that's what we're really trying to drive home here, is that there's services out there like KnowBe4, which is that logo you see on the upper right-hand corner. That's the program that we use and recommend for our clients. In fact, we use it at the BBB, and that's a security awareness training program where we can do simulated phish tests, where we create a crafty email to try to trick all the BBB employees. We send it out to them, and when they click on a link, it takes them to a training module where they do a brief, 5, 10, 30-minute, whatever long, you can actually choose, training and track their training to make sure that all your employees are going through some sort of educational process. We highly recommend that because that one is so easy to use. Their training is actually enjoyable. It's not dry and boring. So employees, even when they fall victim, say that they do, tend to enjoy the training and they do benefit from it. Mindcast, Fish Inside, Trend Micro are other tools that you can use too to kind of just monitor against phishing attacks. But really, that's the one thing that I would say that is probably the biggest threat is, and we've mentioned this already, is just your employees and just making sure that they're educated. So being educated allows them to protect themselves against email, advertising, website, smartphone, and malware and social engineering, all that stuff all together. The term for that, if you may have heard, is called the Human Firewall. And I don't know if we referenced it in this presentation, but most protection software only is about 50% effective. And many of you might be shocked to hear that an antivirus is only half protective. Well, I mean, it's because most allow the user to continue, right? So if you've ever clicked on something and your computer had a pop-up, your antivirus solution popped up and said, hey, do you want to continue? You've seen it. The person can say, oh, yes, those are links from my best friend. I want to see what those pictures are, and click it, right? Then nothing really stops them from doing that. So it's just something you got to be aware of and make sure that your employees are trained.
All great advice.
Yeah.
And some takeaways. I think some of these are as simple as they sound. These are really great takeaways that you guys provide for people.
Yeah, we mentioned multi-factor authentication at the very beginning and a couple times through. That's the number one thing that everybody needs to do no matter what. And just, maybe why you need to do it, an additional just FYI is that Microsoft here before too long is going to release formal literature that says that they no longer are going to require passwords for access to things like office.com. It's because if you have multi-factor authentication set up, you don't need a password. So just something to be aware of. And for the time being, though, that is how you protect yourself pretty much against all the things that we just mentioned, other than phishing emails when somebody might fall victim to accidentally giving away their credentials. But with multi-factor authentication, that can still protect that if it's just email and password. They would get a text message if that hacker tries to log in, so it still stops it. So anyway, that's something just I would start with. Train your staff, as we just mentioned. If you don't have an IT department, one of the things that might be challenging coming away from this is what we've mentioned here: review, discuss, and implement email access rules. For those that do have an IT department or a company like ours, or we're happy to help too, it's good to take a look through your productivity suite that you're using. So if you're using Google Apps for work or Microsoft, there's a number of rules that you can go check the box next to. It's literally a checkbox, and stop a lot of the cyber threats. So for example, if you know that you don't travel and your company doesn't travel outside of the country, there's a checkbox that you can just check to say, don't allow any email from outside the country, and that helps stop some of the phishing that comes in, because that's where a lot of it comes from, outside the US. There's also a checkbox for impossible travel. So if somebody logs into their Microsoft Office account from Chicago, Illinois, and then 2 seconds later they log into it from Ghana, it'll recognize that that's not possible, and it'll stop the Ghana login. So again, if you need help with that, let us know. That's the type of support that we provide to customers. Or if you do have an IT department or IT personnel that you already use, I'm sure that's something that they can do pretty easily for you. And then lastly, that goes right into this: ensure active management by your IT staff or provider, just making sure that everything that you have security-wise is always up to date with the latest and greatest, because like I said, they do come out with, when I say they, I'm referring to pretty much any antivirus. They come out with updates weekly, so you just want to make sure that those are applied to your computers, your network devices, your servers, or whatever you have. All right.
It's all great advice. If you need any more information about the Better Business Bureau, we invite you to go to gettoknowbbb.org, or you can contact us directly. We'd welcome any contact and any questions. Brandon, how do they reach you if they have further questions from you about any type of cyber information?
Sure. You can contact me directly. My email is Brandon, my first name, BRANDON, at SaginLLC.com. That's SAGIN LLC.com.
And then again, we invite any questions that come in. Brandon, can you tell a couple of stories from the field about the companies without identifying them, of course, that have really been hit, like really, some tough stories from the trenches, either small, medium-sized businesses that you work with, and just talk about what an impact it's had on them.
Sure. I'll give three if you don't mind. We had a healthcare client, and obviously red flags there, right? It's a healthcare client. That means they have access to people's personal information. And, all it took was one simple phishing email, like we mentioned, that happened, in this presentation, to one of the key executives there who did happen to have access to everything, something that they had wanted and requested, but realistically, in retrospect, didn't necessarily need. And once the hacker gained access to their accounts, they were able to start forwarding emails from their Office 365 account to their own account. And it's a common practice that a lot of hackers will do too, as a way to, they don't necessarily want to go through and review all your historical information. They might just actually try to see how you communicate, who you're communicating with, what's currently happening, what type of information are you sending. So that's why they do that, because they want to see if they can use that information to do something. The common silly one is that they'll see your writing style, figure out who the accountant is. So as an executive, they'll write an email, because they now have access to your account, to the accountant and say, hey, can you wire me money? Do it in a way that looks like it's actually from you, because it's got your email signature, your tone that you normally write with. That could happen. Didn't happen in this particular example, but that's just what they do. In this case, they got access to their Microsoft account, learned of the critical systems that they were using for managing healthcare data, because that information was passed in email. So they just used the same username and password and tried logging into that healthcare related system, and it worked. So then they gained access to it. And that was a breach that had to be reported, to many authorities as well too. So, sometimes it's that simple. It was one easy mistake that became, I don't want to call it a national event, but a big event. Another example along the lines of the ransomware that I think is just kind of interesting, same sort of thing. There was a museum in the city of Chicago that we provided support for, and there was an administrative assistant to the CEO who had access to all of their data that lived on their file server. Sorry, that's like the IT term for it. If you know that you have like network drives in your company, or you store information, some sort of central shared place that's within the company, but it's not in the cloud, that's what that is. It's stored on what's called the file server. But she had access to everything, being the CEO's administrative assistant. That was required. She got an phishing email. I know, common theme here with where it starts, right? She got a phishing email and clicked on it, and it was a ransomware file that she ended up downloading. It was an email from one of her friends, and because this person had access to all of that information on the file server, it not only encrypted and locked all the information that was just on her computer itself, because her computer had access to that file server, it locked everything down on the entire file server too. So the severity of it is, it's a museum. They're in the business of historical records, and if suddenly you lose access to that, you literally lose access to history. So thankfully, we had enough protections in place, backup processes that happen on an hourly basis versus daily. So no data was lost, but it was a huge scare for the organization. One of the ones that I think is kind of interesting, there's an arts and entertainment business here in Chicago that we also support. And their CEO is I'll just say, is a high profile individual in that industry. And they have homes in multiple places around the United States, and they don't want to have to travel with their computer. So they have computers in all of these different places where they live and work from, and they prefer Macs, and also don't want to have to delineate between work and professional usage on a computer. So the challenge for us was, you'll hear in just a minute, we're not exactly sure how it happened, but his Apple ID was compromised. So all those devices and everything that he was accessing and doing across all of them suddenly became exposed. And because he was blending the personal with the professional, it didn't go to just himself. They were actually able to, because of what you can view via Apple. If anybody are Mac users out there, that on a Mac, you can also do text messaging. So they were able to see his exact tone and nature of writing, which, you know, he's very passive aggressive, if you will. The hacker was able to know about a trip that he took to London, send a text message to their CFO saying that they need money for a specific show that they were going to be putting on and for a specific purpose that that hacker would have, you know, found from looking through their text messages and emails and such. So the CFO wired him the money and, you know, never got it back. And when it came to what we could do to fix it, it was really difficult for us because we troubleshooted everything on the work side of his accounts, but never thought, you know, wait a minute, could they have gotten access to all this stuff just by his, you know, simple exposure of his Apple ID? And then once we figured that out, luckily the solution is just changing his password, and that was it. But, you know, the damage had already been done. It caused them to really freak out and think that, you know, company was now insecure and their archives and everything that they have now been exposed. And that wasn't the case. It's just one of those, I think it's a good example just to show that, you know, also maybe the other side of the coin is when you do get a breach or something like that happens, it's not always that they're going to go after everything. They're really just looking for the quick, easy way to make a buck, which, you know, you could probably guess, and that's what they did in this case. So I thought that was kind of an interesting angle that I hadn't seen before, using an Apple ID, which I think they probably expected it to be gaining access to his phone, but just so happened to be these 5 computers that he had across the U.S. So they got lucky.
Brandon, is there any way to explain who's on the other end of this stuff? Who puts this much time and effort into it? And who is there any way to explain who's on the other side of these type of things? I know some of them are very low intelligent hacks. They're just, you know, they send out 1 million and they find 2,000 people to fall for it, and that's all they need, right? But can you tell us what's on the other side? What stories have you heard? Like who's actually out there spying on people and trying to get into companies?
I mean, it might sound cliche from what you hear on the news, but there's you know, a little bit of truth to everything, right? So a lot of times it is smart individuals from developing countries, you know, and, you know, just lower economic status, and they're just trying to find a quick way to make a buck. The United States is easy. We're this wealthy country, as are other, you know, countries, let's say, you know, around the globe, but we're easy targets, especially like the older generations, you know, tend to be more susceptible because they're not as familiar with technology and, you know, kind of trust when people contact them in a way that seems familiar or authentic, versus those that are younger tend to be, you know, a little bit more aware. But yeah, it usually is somebody that, you know, just it's no unlike any other criminal. They, you know, they're bright, they're educated, they have a way of understanding, you know, how they can trick somebody into providing their information. Now, I should say that's the good ones. The bad ones could be anybody. You know, it's just somebody that's really desperate for money. So, in, you know, their countries overseas, and they think that if they live, you know, there, that they're never going to get caught, and in most cases they probably won't because they don't have the right infrastructure, government in place to crack down on them. And even if the United States government tries to work with them, it just a lot of times it won't be followed through. So they know they can get away with it. And I think to really answer your question, it depends on like the culture of the country. You know, there definitely is the stigma that a lot of us have heard from the news. Let's say it's, you know, from various countries in Africa or Russia or the Ukraine or China. Well, that's where a lot of it's coming from. They don't have those mechanisms in place to crack down on cybercrime, so they can get away with it.
And can you tell us real briefly what businesses should watch out for in their vendors? I've heard stories where businesses had their companies compromised and have had everything from cyber attacks to ransomware to viruses installed because of one of the weaknesses in one of their vendors. Do you have any advice for any company out there that's doing business with a vendor, what they might ask them to make sure that their vendor chain is as secure as it can be?
Gosh, there's a big it depends. But
Sorry.
I would say this. If you work with a vendor that keeps any sensitive information for you, bank account, you know, ACH information for bank transfers, credit card information, employee information, personal health information, personally identifiable information. You might have seen acronyms PHI and PII. That's what those two things are. If they're housing any of that information, you just want to make sure that they're doing all the things that we just recommended. You want to ask about, okay, so where is your system? Is it in the cloud, or is it in your business? How are you securing the information? Just to make sure that they abide by whatever compliance that you need to do. So for all the things I just mentioned, there are compliance, like you might have heard of HIPAA, that's more healthcare. PCI is more credit card information. And at this point, I think most companies out there are aware of those compliance needs that do have to abide by them, and they try to. But it's good to just make sure that if those vendors have any of that type of information that they're holding for you, or that you are yourselves, you're accountable, that you have these protection mechanisms in place to make sure that everything is secure as it's supposed to be. I would say this, though, if you're working with a vendor that you're emailing credit card information to or bank account information to, you should probably stop that and go do more of some sort of more professional means or secure means of emailing. You can encrypt emails, so that's a way around that, or there's other different there's things that are out there that allow you to share information privately, or the old school way of a phone call always works. And if a company or a vendor doesn't have the right kind of technology to do all that, that's actually what we recommend. Phone call information over the phone, that is what's HIPAA and PCI compliant. Don't write it down. I know a lot of companies will still do that anyway, but technically you're not supposed to, but that works.
I can't thank you enough for your time, information, and these
Sure.
great stories. I know they're scary stories, but it is the Halloween season. We actually did an event at City Hall for BACP a couple of years ago on Halloween, and we billed it as scary cybercrime stories, and they are scary, but hopefully for many people watching, it's a cautionary tale that can really save them a lot of time and trouble.
And Tom and Brandon, there were 2 questions that came in.
Okay.
What do you advise us to do about fake checks that were clear at the bank?
That's a big problem, because every time we tell this to a room of people, most people are very surprised. They think a check clears and it's good and it's on the bank if they detect it as a fake, but they actually can detect it weeks after. There was a law passed in the United States, I believe at the congressional level, that made banks make funds available to people for all the right reasons in a quick way. They couldn't wait a week before they got it out. So they have to clear checks within 24 to 48 hours. It could be 3 days. And the problem with that is they can't detect fake checks that soon. So you have to be very, very careful about that and report it immediately. If first off, don't try to cash checks from people you don't know, because almost exclusively they're going to be fraudulent. And the moment you find out about this, just contact your bank immediately. And also the FBI has a group called IC3, which deals in banks and wire frauds, and those are the 2 people to contact. We unfortunately see this at BBB come to our scam tracker in big waves. We don't see it for a while, and then all of a sudden it's fake check scams come rolling in. It's everything from invoices, from advertisement, yellow pages, all that type of stuff. It's just pure fraudulent. And they figure if they send enough of these out, that people will actually pay the invoices. And these fake checks have become a significant currency of scammers. So really, really beware of that. And you're going to have to do a lot of diligence and make sure that you're dealing with a legitimate company before you ever look at this type of thing. And I can tell you from our experience, I'm not saying there aren't legitimate work from home offers out there, because there are, but there are far more that are not. So watch out for those checks, and know that even though it clears and it shows up in your account, it could be scooped away from you. And if you are a business who has fallen for a fake check, you don't have many protections. You don't have many protections in place to get your money back. Consumers, yes. Businesses, not so much.
Great. The second question, is there any way to detect or be alerted if your system has been breached or hacked?
Yeah. And I guess it depends on what you mean by system. So most small businesses, I'll just make this assumption, use cloud-based tools or software as a service like Microsoft 365 for email, documents, Google Workspace, that kind of stuff. Most reputable big names like that have what we call conditional access rules. And that's what I briefly described earlier when I mentioned there were check boxes that you could check to say, is this impossible travel or are they outside the country? When those type of things get attempted, they will trigger an alert to the admin for the system to say, hey, there's been some sort of suspicious activity. So all of those big name companies will do that. Can't guarantee it for all. I know that I've come across a few businesses that are very specific, like salon and spa software. You know, there's various ones that are out there that are big names, but I know they don't have those type of rules. So it kind of depends on what you're using. As far as if it's like, you have servers in your business and it has application running on them, and that's something that you need to track or be aware of. You want to make sure that you have a firewall in place, and it's a physical device that does just security prevention, and it does things like send alerts for the same sort of thing. Like there's been some sort of anomaly behavior that needs to be reported to an IT admin, and they send email alerts. That's pretty much what they all do. Beyond that, there's also the antivirus software that you're using on a computer or a server or network that will also do that same sort of thing. It's that pop-up that I mentioned earlier. So it is possible that an employee will just dismiss it and you sort of lost the alert, but that's the way that one comes in too. So there's a few means for that. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. That is all the questions that we have. I want to thank both Brandon and Tom for your time and all your great information. Again, this will be posted at www.youtube.com/ChicagoBACP. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, BACP.
Yes, thanks, everybody.